So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and American League Baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Dying sucks. For those left behind, that is. Not sure yet what it means to the deceased. There are all the feelings of sadness and regret, things left unsaid, things left undone. We're always looking for ways to express ourselves and our emotions when a loved one passes. The Internet, of course, has the answer. The Internet has the answer to everything, haven't you noticed? Legacy.com is the permanent resting place for expressing all the thoughts and emotions you have for the deceased. It's also a place where we can share our grief and memories with other mourners. Some we know, some we don't. And when a celebrity dies, as occurred with actress Natasha Richardson yesterday, it becomes an online gathering place for admirers and fans to learn more about the individual as a human being. Joining me today to talk about Legacy.com is its Chief Operating Officer, Hayes Ferguson. Hayes, welcome to Mr. Media.
Well, thanks so much, Bob. Or should I call you Mr. Media? Is Bob okay?
You can call me anything you want, four-letter words included.
All right. Well, I'll stick with Bob, and thank you again for having me on the show.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Now, Hayes, no one expected the death of actress Natasha Richardson yesterday. Tell me how Legacy.com sprang into action when this happened.
Well, I think that there were reports earlier in the day that she might have been taken off of life support, so we anticipated that she might pass, and in fact, we're sort of debating, well, should we start to prepare something, but that would make us feel uncomfortable. So we were sort of just agreed to monitor the news, and as soon as the news was announced, we very quickly posted an online memorial guest book for her, and that's typically how we handle the announcement of anybody who has passed. But in this case, there was a little bit of a heads up that it might be coming.
And so, what did you post, and what's become traditional for Legacy.com to do in the case of a celebrity death?
What we do for celebrities as well as ordinary people is a couple of things. We very simply put their obituary or life story on the Internet, and that's something that we've been doing for about 10 years. We then add automatically a guest book, which is an electronic version of the book that people historically signed at funerals. Our idea for that was very simple, that there would be a place accessible to anybody who had computer access to share thoughts or express condolences. So that's essentially what we did in the case of Natasha Richardson. She's featured on our homepage at Legacy.com. There is an obituary that describes her life, tells about her achievements and her family connections. There's also a guest book that already has received close to 1,000 entries, and entries typically are anything from photos that fans or friends might post to long anecdotes. Somebody might describe an experience that involved a movie of hers, or just more perfunctory sympathy greetings. We also, I should also mention,
sure.
we have a third thing that, again, this has evolved over the past decade. We also create a legacy memorial website, and there is one for Ms. Richardson, and that is basically takes the guest book to another level and includes a media library where video can be posted. Again, this is available to regular people as well as to celebrities, but it includes a personal journal, because one of the things that we saw that was happening a lot with guest books is that people wanted to connect in other ways. They didn't want to just use it as a place to express condolences. They wanted to reach out and really network socially. And so the Legacy Memorial websites allow users to do much more, essentially build a website for a loved one.
I guess that's something that actually happens at funerals. I mean, you go and you meet other people who knew the deceased, and you get to talking about, I guess you share your stories and your experiences, and in some ways, of all things, a funeral does become a bit of a networking opportunity.
It really, and what's so powerful about the Internet is it really does allow us to do so many things that we couldn't beforehand, and it's come at a good time because because we're not all living in the towns where we were born. We're not able to talk over the backyard fence to our neighbors. And what this does is it just opens up the community to the entire world. Again, anybody who's got computer access. And we've seen wonderful examples of this over the years. We often hear from people who say, gee, my aunt passed away, but I live across the country and I was unable to attend the funeral, but really being able to read this publicly accessible guest book made me feel like I was able to participate in a small way. Another example of just the power of the Internet is we've seen instances where, in fact, I remember one in particular. It was a high school band teacher from a suburb of Pittsburgh, and he passed away. And apparently, one or two of his students saw the obituary in the local newspaper, and then went online, saw the guest book, and sent it to 10 of their friends. Well, you can imagine what happened next. Those 10 students sent it to 10 more students. For long, there were close to 3,000 entries for this high school teacher, and some of them were the most moving stories. There was one in particular from a girl who said she had been this sort of shy, introverted freshman, and she'd really felt like she sort of came into who she was by being part of the band. And I thought, when we first saw this, and this was one of the really first examples, there were entries coming from Madrid, Spain, all over the world, from former students, and I thought this is a wonderful thing for his family. All of these notes combined to really paint a robust picture of who this person was. And this wouldn't have been possible 10 or 15 years ago, because the reality is most of the students would not have heard about his passing. Even if they had, it would have been difficult to track down a postal address for his surviving family. This way, they not only were able to quickly and easily get a message to the family, they were able to sort of share with others and see what others were thinking about.
Who was the first celebrity death that really changed that element of Legacy.com's business plan?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I can't. You stumped me there. I can't recall the first celebrity we posted. I certainly can tell you the one that received more entries than anybody else, and to date remains far and away the most popular, if you will, celebrity to appear, and that's Rosa Parks.
Really?
Close to 50,000 entries. So it's been very interesting to us to see that it's not necessarily the ones people might assume that, gee, well, Katharine Hepburn, wouldn't she draw thousands and thousands of entries? And it doesn't mean that Katharine Hepburn was any less loved or admired, but there was something that triggered far more people to go and express their feelings about Rosa Parks than did for, say, a Katharine Hepburn.
Now, when Legacy.com was, when it was someone's brainchild, was celebrity deaths part of the plan, or did that kind of grow out of it?
That's a good question. It was not, I wouldn't say it was sort of a key part of the plan, but it was always sort of, I think how we approached it when the company was started 10 years ago is that we wanted this to be the place where people's stories could live on, and that was ordinary people as much as celebrities. And in fact, the focus initially, as it is now, is more on ordinary people. The celebrity profiles get a lot of attention for obvious reasons, but each month, 800,000 people are submitting entries to guest books prepared for regular folks. We post obituaries for more than two-thirds of the people who die in the United States. So I would say we have set out really to be a place where ordinary people can express condolences and share, but we sort of always have factored in the celebrities. They've over time, though, as you may know, the celebrities certainly have occupied more space on our homepage, and again, that's partly just because of the fact that we know there's great interest in them by a lot of people.
Well, I imagine it's kind of a good, on the business side of things, it's a good lead in that some people probably discover the site because they hear about a celebrity who dies and that there's a page on the site, and then it's like, oh, hey, I could do this, for a family member one day.
Absolutely. That's certainly our hope, is that when they come and they see what's possible for Natasha Richardson, that they can see that they can do it for their own family member. And in fact, that was sort of one of the driving considerations when we started the business was, gosh, there are a lot of extraordinary, ordinary people who pass away, whose deaths aren't really noted in any significant way for a lot of reasons. In particular, I know that our CEO had a grandfather who lived to be 100 years old. He was he had immigrated from Eastern Europe. He raised prize-winning poultry in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Well, he was a remarkable, wonderful person who raised terrific kids and grandchildren, but he wasn't the mayor. He wasn't the bank president. He wasn't the sort of person who normally would have been profiled in the newspaper. And that was part of the CEO's thinking was, gee, wouldn't it be great? And the reason for that, as we all know, is that there's only so much space in a print newspaper. And the Internet opened up new possibilities, as you could write as much as you wanted about a loved one, post as many pictures, and so that, you know, your grandfather could have as much of a tribute as Natasha Richardson.
Mm-hmm. I want to tell anybody listening, if you'd like to get in on this conversation, if you've got a comment or question for Hayes Ferguson, the Chief Operating Officer of Legacy.com, give us a call at 1-646-595-3135. You mentioned that Rosa Parks, and I know that when we will talk about other things besides the celebrities, but just in light of Natasha Richardson's passing, it seems very timely. Besides Rosa Parks, who are some of the other big draws in death?
Rosa Parks, obviously, the top. Over the past year, last year, for example, Bernie Mac was the biggest draw, if you will. And I would not be surprised, speaking of Natasha Richardson, if she would. I mean, the indications are right now that she will also draw a lot of condolence notes. And I think certainly what Natasha Richardson and Bernie Mac have in common is that they were relatively young and their deaths were unexpected. And I think people are often more moved, or at least moved to go to the Internet and share their feelings. They're more jarred by these deaths and touched in a way that they might not be necessarily for somebody whose death was expected. Now, in the case of Rosa Parks, again, she doesn't fall into either of those characters. She was not relatively young. Her death wasn't unexpected, but she clearly resonated. She struck a chord, and that's what we see the response to is when somebody strikes a chord. Another one of the big draws last year was Meredith Emerson. She was, not a celebrity, but she became known. She was the young hiker who was kidnapped in the mountains of northern Georgia and killed. And that, again, was a story that really moved people. Paul Newman drew a decent number of entries last year, but was not an all-time record breaker. Luther Vandross was probably, in fact, I'm pretty sure he was the second biggest draw after Rosa Parks, and I think that was largely because of his music had such an incredible impact on people's lives. We had more people writing in and saying, I proposed with your music playing in the background. Our children were conceived with your music in the background. So he had quite an impact on people's lives.
Folks, that's what I want to hear one day. I want to hear that you conceived your children while listening to Mr. Media. So, send in those notes now. Do the fans keep coming to these sites long after the celebrity passes, or is it pretty much maybe a week or two, a big spike, and then it comes back down? I mean, is anyone still going to the Rosa Parks site?
Amazingly, yes, but certainly in much smaller numbers. What we see both with the high-profile celebrity guest books and the ordinary guest books is that there is a spike in the weeks after the death. I mean, that's certainly when folks are top of mind, when emotions are raw. But what we do see is that people will revisit the guest book or the Legacy Memorial website and say, gosh, I know it's been 1 year since your death. And by the way, people literally do say you because there is a lot of writing directly to the deceased. So we do see on anniversaries, other special occasions, or people who are coming across the guest book for the first time. But it goes from, we go from seeing, hundreds or thousands in a day to maybe a couple a week.
And I think you started to touch on this before, but what is the difference, as we kind of segue here, what's the difference between a memorial site on Legacy.com for celebrity and one for, kind of an average working Joe?
There really isn't. They both are very similar, and again, that's part of our core philosophy is that everybody has a story to tell, and whether you're Ron Silver or my grandmother, there is a story to be told, and so in both cases, we create the websites for the celebrities. We do those, and the others are created by family members. And they include the exact same components. There's a timeline that shows somebody's life achievements, what they did during childhood, where they were in their teenage years, and we line that up against a historical timeline so that you can connect and say, oh, gosh, she was coming of age during the Vietnam War. But they otherwise look and feel exactly the same.
And what are some of the options? So okay. Well, let's go. Let me go further back. So, Grandpa Joe is taking a turn for the worse. I know that the time is coming. Do I decide that I want to go create a site for him, and do I pay for this? How does that part of the system work?
Sure. Well, first of all, presumably that you would be submitting an obituary to your local newspaper or to the town where your grandfather lived, and that obituary would be in the print edition of the newspaper. The newspaper would send that to us as well. There automatically would be attached to that the online guest book that we've talked about. There's then an option for anybody who's visiting the guest book or the obituary for Joe to say, you know what, I want to take this to another level. I want to build a full-blown website. I mean, the guest book is literally an electronic book. It's a book that you can literally turn pages, but it is limited in that you can't also journal, sort of write in a diary. You can't add the same. There's not a timeline. That is what a Legacy Memorial website is, complete with its own website address. And what we see, what's quite common is people will gather as they're already gathering, sort of in the wake of somebody's death, and they'll compile photos. What I imagine happens is that people are sitting in their kitchens just as they prepare boards for the actual funeral and saying, well, let's also put these online so that there is a long-lasting memorial to Uncle Joe, because the services will be complete in the next couple of days. Relatives will go back to their regular lives, but this is something that people can check in on whenever they wish. And I think that's the biggest difference between the memorial website. It's just much more robust. The website includes the guest book, the obituary, and much, much more. And there are also, I should mention, options both through the memorial website but also through the Legacy site for people who want to connect with others, with strangers, for example, who may have shared a similar loss. We have a section called Legacy Connect that literally is a social networking avenue that allows people to join discussion groups, the sudden loss of a loved one, loss of a grandparent, and we're seeing a lot of engagement there. This is allowing people to do what I think they were trying to do early on sometimes in the guest book, which was to reach out to others. But we're very sensitive about what's allowed to go in the guest books. We screen every single entry, it should be noted, before it goes online because of the sensitive nature of the category. And so early on we learned that a lot of people were very taken aback to go and read their grandfather's guest book and have a note from somebody saying, hey, my last name is Youngman too. Do you think maybe we were related? Now, some people would welcome that kind of a note, and others found it were quite offended by it. And so we as a policy won't post those sorts of solicitations, if you will. However, now through Legacy Connect, people can swap phone numbers, email addresses, or on our discussion boards talk about whatever they want. We monitor it, but we're certainly not deciding what gets posted. So through the Legacy Memorial website and Legacy Connect, we've really expanded on this very simple idea of a decade ago.
What about multimedia? Can can I post a video of
yes.
Uncle Charlie?
Absolutely. There's video opportunities. You can post obviously photos, but one of the things that is really quite moving is to go online and see a memorial where the grandma blowing out the candles at her 90th birthday. I mean, that's a wonderful document, we feel, to leave for the generations to come. This is, our name is, after all, Legacy.com, and this is about people's legacies and what will be available to future generations. One of the things that we think is very exciting is the ability to sort of pass on to future generations so much more information. I think in my case, the most I might know about a great-grandparent or anybody before that is their name. Perhaps I know the resting place. Perhaps I could go visit their grave, and I might know some basic details about that person that could have been passed down orally in my family. Maybe there's a yellowed newspaper obituary, but that's it, or maybe a photo even. But in this case, imagine that somebody who dies today, that their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren could go on and hear their voices and see them in videos and find out so many more details about their lives. Is one of the things we're most proud of, that we're helping facilitate this, and it's quite powerful. And we hear from people too that it's a way of compiling everybody's memories. In my own case, we built a tribute years ago to my grandmother, who also had a long and full life, but a rather simple one as a homemaker who could cook very well. And what was exciting is I was among 8 grandchildren, and I sent the link to her life story, which was the forerunner to the Legacy Memorial website. I sent it to my friends who had met her. My cousins all did the same, and everybody wrote in notes. And individually, I would have heard from just my friends, not my cousins' friends in Missouri. And all of a sudden, there was this document, and at least a half a dozen times, somebody referred to her cooking, which was great because that was a big part of who she was. And 3 people called her feisty. that was very interesting that, she wasn't just feisty to me. She made that impression on anybody she met. So it's just a way of collecting a lot of information, putting it in one place that's accessible to anybody who wants it for a long, long time.
And what is the cost of doing this?
Building a Legacy Memorial website is $49, and that includes the website address, which we acquire for the family, storage, and that's the initial one. That's the first year setup, and it's $19 for every year beyond that if a family wants to maintain it online. We, again, as Legacy, believe that this is something that should be maintained online, but a lot of families say, it's something that we prefer to just have online for the first year, and then we will maybe print out versions of it. We do have a printed guest book product if somebody wants the old-fashioned tangible memory, and that makes sense, and it's fine. It's either way is fine, but it's $49 to do that. The guest book is typically included with the newspaper obituary, and most newspapers keep those online for 30 days or some of them for up to a year. If a family wants to permanently sponsor a guest book, they can do so for $79.99 a year. And that allows it to be, again, we will be monitoring that as we do. There are a lot of people who use the guest book as a means of writing to the deceased on a daily basis. We review those entries. And so it really becomes a living tribute, if you will. It is something that allows people, when they have a thought about somebody, to quickly go onto the website, and whether it's the guest book or the Legacy Memorial website, and share their thoughts. And it really is amazing to us to see people, especially on anniversaries of tragedies like 9/11, people will come and share their thoughts and say, it's hard to believe it's been 7 years, thinking of you today. And I think, gosh, what a wonderful thing for the families.
And, I wondered about the cost because very tastefully there are no ads on these pages. People should know that.
Yeah, that's something we take. Everything we do, we really think long and hard about. We recognize that we're obviously in a very sensitive category, and for a long time we had no advertising whatsoever. We have over the years realized there is some appropriate advertising, if you will, that actually in some ways might be useful to users. And one of those, we do have ads in certain places for florists, for example, because we just know that a lot of users are looking for that information anyway. And it is quite frankly another source of revenue for the company. And when there's another source of revenue, that can also reduce the cost to the consumer of building a website. And we want to be sensitive to that as well.
So when and how did the site come about?
It was 1998, and our CEO, Stouffer Bartle, had been in talks with a guy who had this very simple idea of taking obituaries from the newspaper and blowing them out, if you will, on the internet. Again, at that time, the most you could either hope that your loved one would get recognized by the community in an editorial obituary, or you would have to pay a lot of money to get a long obituary in markets where they actually did sell death notice space. In any event, it was limiting. I don't think I've ever seen a death notice in a newspaper that is longer than a few inches or several inches is a really long one. And the idea was, gosh, let's use technology to be able to write as much as we want about this person. In a newspaper, one photo maximum. That's just the way it's set up. Well, let's go and be able to have an album that shows Aunt Josie as a child, as a teenager, on her wedding day, the birth of her grandchild, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the idea very simply at the beginning. We recognized early on that newspapers were the logical partner in this endeavor, that they, too, at the same time, were going to be looking for other solutions as they migrated a lot of their content to the Internet. And so a partnership was formed initially with Tribune Company, and they are and remain an investor in the company, and we started working with their newspapers, which include the Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and then it quickly took off from that point on, and we now host the obituary sections for more than 700 newspapers in the country, 76 of the top 100. We are hosting the obituary sections, and it's a great partnership that makes a lot of sense. The newspaper, I believe, despite the industry's troubles, remains a trusted source, and it is the place people go to get this information. And if somebody wants to get the word out that their grandfather has passed on, they want it to be in the Chicago Tribune so that people in Chicago will get that news. What the newspapers have asked us to do as part of the partnership is we take care of the rest. The newspaper takes the information in from the funeral homes with whom they have long-standing relationships. They verify the information because obviously you don't want to have pranks in this category. And then they send us the information, and we in turn put it on the Internet and add the bells and whistles, such as the guest book, directions to the funeral services, and the ability to upload additional photos or convert this to a website. And we do that in conjunction with the papers, and it's a model that's worked very well.
And do you have many people who create their own memorial site? It's kind of creepy to think about, but it takes all kinds.
I can't think of any examples of that we've been really aware of that happening. But you're talking about somebody who may know that their days are limited and they want to sort of put something together. Is that?
Yeah, or just that they're so self-involved that they don't want to leave it to other people, that they want to.
Yeah, I suspect in some cases. I certainly have heard. I think sort of not even in the online world, but in sort of the offline world. I think there are people who certainly may work on their funeral arrangements. I think they might say, "I want this song sung, et cetera, et cetera." So I suspect there are those who might also say, "I'd like this photo published in the newspaper. I want this photo on the website." But we haven't. That's usually activity that's handled by the family, and we just don't know much about how it comes to be. But I would imagine there are some folks that have a hand in the planning of all aspects of the funeral, including the website that will memorialize them.
Have you had any examples where a family member wanted to do something that they were very sincere about, but you guys decided it was not in the best of taste?
Yes, we have. And it's tricky because this is the Internet. These are what one family might find appropriate could be seen as very distasteful to another family member, I should say. I will say that we are stricter in our guidelines when it comes to content that is going to be on a newspaper site, because the newspapers themselves don't want something to be littered with foul or racist jokes. So that's an example where we will step in and say, you just can't write this, even though your family might find it really funny. It's not going on the newspaper site. There's more leeway on websites that are a little more removed from the newspaper, just because we do feel like these are private, or they're not they're publicly accessible, but ultimately these are tributes created by the family for the family members. And as long as it's not totally obscene, we will pretty much let anything go. But we've had some cases where people have pushed the envelope, if you will.
Well, speaking of pushing the envelope, I had a question. I wondered, do you ever have videos from the deceased that are published, that are posted? I mean, we always see these movies and TV shows where someone has recorded a video to be shown after their passing. Does that ever happen?
I know it happens because I think the New York Times does that on its own, independent of us. We have not, that I know of, seen that. We certainly see videos that the family has recorded when the deceased was living, but that's not something that I've heard of somebody actually recording a video with the intention of it being kept for posterity. I don't know about that, but I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think there's value in that. Why not be able to hear what your grandfather or great-grandfather wanted to tell future generations? I think that's powerful, and we certainly wouldn't discourage it.
Interesting. So I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you is, what's next? What's the next development in this process for Legacy.com? Where can you go from here?
Well, I think we're constantly looking at ways to evolve the products that we provide, and I think the sort of the example of that is we started off just doing pretty simple guest books that allowed people to submit notes, and then soon they were able to add photos, and now they can build full-blown websites and add video. We also, in the process of as I mentioned, a big part of what we do is host obituary sections for newspapers, and we're in the process of completely updating and redesigning those sites so that they allow people to search information much more easily. We know a lot of people come to our site because they're interested in genealogy, and so now they can go to any of our newspaper affiliates or directly to Legacy.com and plug in a name and look for a death record, do research essentially, and we've made that a lot easier. So I think that's an area that we'll be exploring in greater depth. We'll also continue to build our social network. We think there's great potential, and it's a terrific service for people. They want to be able to connect at these times, and we're providing a way for the person who may live in a remote area or, quite frankly, doesn't feel comfortable going to talk to somebody in person. We're opening up a lot of channels for them to be able to do that grieving, and again, always looking for ways of improving the core products that we offer and making them as useful for the families as possible.
Well, folks, you can check out the Legacy.com site by surfing the web. This is easy to remember, www.legacy.com. And, Hayes, I want to thank you for being on the show. You're a very interesting company. Well,
thank you very much for having us. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here.
All right, thanks. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
And bye-bye. And folks, for more interviews with website creators and as well as bloggers and stuff, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with the men and women behind alltop.com, webs.com, crooksandliars.com, thewb.com, and many more. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites. Whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Pointer Online, MySpace, Digital Journal, Podcast Pickle, Vox, Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, or Odeo. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. It's ANDELMAN.com. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/andelman. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate when you give up a little piece of your day to spend it with Mr. Media.